everyone! My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are back once again with another very popular and important topic in the world of BDSM, switches. Apparently Bandit is going to join us for part of this. She's deciding she wants to cuddle up with me, I guess, right now. Well, with that being said, I have recently gotten a lot of comments and questions about this during some live streams and in comments on videos, and I realized that, as is happening a lot lately, the last time I talked about this was 5 years ago, and suffice to say, I have a lot more information about switches that I would like to share today, and hopefully we can do a better job exploring the wide and wonderful world of switching within BDSM here today. So let's go ahead and get into it. First of all, what is a switch? Is that like an implement? Is that like a cane or a paddle? And I guess technically you could use a switch in a BDSM scene, but for this context, a switch is someone that changes between roles on both sides of the slash. So the slash is the D and the S. So they go between being a D type and being an S type, or topping and bottoming in scenes in some kind of combination. Now that is a very broad overview of being a switch, and as is the case with so many different kinks and ways of doing BDSM, it all very much varies on an individual level. So what are some of the ways that you can be a switch? I think the first most common way is what is called being a top-bottom switch, where you go between being the person who is giving the sensation or performing the actions in the scene and the person who is receiving the sensations or receiving the actions in the scene. This could be, like, for example, somebody that goes between topping for impact play and bottoming for rope bondage. You can also bottom and top for the same activity, of course. The other big main type is being a dom and sub switch. It is basically the same idea, which is you go between being the one who is receiving power in a power exchange and giving up power in a power exchange. I would say it's less likely you would see someone that does a dom and sub switch with the same partner. It's more typical that you would see, say for example, somebody that is dominant to one partner and they have a totally separate relationship where they are submissive to someone else. But this does happen in many other ways as well. So this is where, for example, you maybe will see a hierarchical DS relationship where there is one dom partner that typically doesn't switch. Then you have a submissive that is submissive to that dom, but then is also dominant or maybe tops, and we'll talk about that in a moment, to another submissive that also submits to the same dom. Is that flowchart making sense? Is that resonating? And this is also where the term alpha submissive gets sometimes used as well, which I did cover actually in a recent video in quite a lot of detail, but it's that same idea where there's a hierarchy between the submissives in a household where all the submissives are submissive to one dominant, but some of the submissives are also dominant over some of the other subs. And like I kind of already hinted at just now, you can also mix up all of these different combinations. So you can be somebody that is a dominant that also bottoms for certain things. You can be a submissive that tops for certain things, or in certain relationships. You can do all four of these in all sorts of different ways. But I do think that for most people, I think the most common ones would be people that are primarily submissive, that do sometimes also top. So they do like submission, bottoming, and they also top. Or you see people that are dominant that also bottom sometimes for some things. Of course, that estimation is only based on my personal experience, and I'm not saying that is necessarily universally true. Now, within being a switch, different people have different levels of preferences for taking on certain roles. And if they do have a stronger preference for one over the other, or they do one more often, that is what's called leaning. So you will hear somebody maybe be called a top leaning switch, or a bottom leaning switch, or a submissive leaning switch. Sometimes, like online, I've seen people say like top switch or bottom switch and really compress it all down, but I've never really heard anyone say that out loud. It's more common to hear the phrase with leaning being in there somewhere. There are also people that don't really have that strong of a preference, and it's more 50-50 or 25-25, 25-25, I guess, where they're more than happy to go between any of the roles because actually being in a particular role is less important to them than getting to do certain things in a scene, maybe getting to explore more unique ideas or having novel experiences or playing with intense sensation or getting a fetish need met. I find that for people that really don't have any kind of preference at all for role, it's less likely they would actually self-label as being a switch. I see a lot more titles that are like hedonist, experimentalist, sensationalist. Of course, I do think this is all on the spectrum of being a switch. Now, one other aspect of this spectrum is not just the roles that you go between and your preference for them, but also how and with whom you are switching. So for some people, they switch between partners. So that means that they only take on certain roles and stay in that role with that particular person. So they only are a top with this one person, are only submissive to this one person, only bottom to this one person. I think a really common variety of this is when you have somebody that is submissive to a primary partner, but then when they go to play parties, they may also top as well as bottom for other people, but they would not be a top to their dominant partner. However, some people do that. They switch with the same partner. I think this is most common when both partners are switches, and it's, I think, just easier to navigate that way, but some people do switch with the same people. So maybe they go between being a top sometimes and a bottom sometimes with one person. They go between being a submissive and a dom, and again, any of those other combinations as well. And I think one aspect of this that I haven't really seen people talk about is not just the roles you go between or the partners you switch with, like if you switch between them with different partners or with the same person or whatever else, but that there's also switching that can happen over time, where you have a really, really strong, maybe like 100% preference for doing one role, and then in 6 months, in a year, you go on to doing something else. And I think this is more common than a lot of people realize, because let's say, for example, you start out in BDSM being a dominant and you really love being in that role. You feel super confident. It feels really comfortable. It feels really natural. But then over time, as you try more things or you get ideas or just your mood changes, who knows, right? You decide, okay, well, actually now I feel more like being a bottom, and you go from being a dom to being a bottom, and then maybe later you go back, or maybe you try just being a top and not being a dom. And I think this is kind of stretching the label of being a switch, and I don't think most people that do this really identify as being a switch per se. Usually, if this happens, people consider it to be more of a transformation. It's more like, I used to be this thing and my identity evolved and now I'm this other thing, and maybe later it'll evolve again and it'll go back or change. And I think it's more that I just want to have this conversation about this being a possibility, because it does really happen. I think a lot of people really feel, I don't want to say trapped in a box, because it's not necessarily negative, but they start out feeling really strongly about one thing and they don't necessarily stay open to all of the possibilities until it really confronts them. I think it's perfectly natural to start out being one thing and then change to something else. It is part of the natural discovery process, because most of us were not exposed to kink at a young age. It didn't have a decade, 2 decades before getting into doing BDSM for real to kind of evaluate what your deeper true feelings about kink actually were. And sometimes actually trying stuff or seeing things that other people are doing give you a completely new perspective and new ideas about what to do that you hadn't previously considered. So yeah, I'm not trying to say as like some kind of authority, that this is like the secret, hidden, special type of being a switch. And I don't think, again, that a lot of people would necessarily self-identify as being a switch if they do this, but I do think it is possible that you can, as a switch, go between really, really, really strong preferences and then change to other really, really strong preferences. And I more want to start a conversation about that. Now, for people who don't have any innate switchy tendencies and tend to be more of the mindset of this thing that I am is immutable and I just am only a submissive and I really, really, really would only want to stay on that side of the slash, the motivations for switching can seem kind of strange. Like, why would you want to do this? Isn't this kind of confusing? How do you really know what you want? Like, it just seems very foreign. But I think actually when you stop and consider it, it's not really that much of a mystery. It's not that people who are switches necessarily relate to BDSM in a totally different way from somebody that only submits or only is a top. It's that they like to do a lot of different things beyond just sticking to one role. And the individual motivations for those kinks, for those roles, isn't that different from somebody that only does that thing. Like, someone can enjoy being a pup and being the pup handler. They can enjoy the serenity and the release and the joy of being a submissive, and also enjoy the feeling of being powerful and in control that comes with being a dominant. They can both have masochistic tendencies and sadistic tendencies. It doesn't mean that those feelings are all mutually exclusive. It just means they happen to like multiple different things in there from multiple different perspectives. And the way that I would maybe analogize this is food preferences. So for some people, they have more narrow palates, and that's not a bad thing. They just know they have a very particular set of foods they like and prefer. They only really like eating hamburgers and macaroni and cheese and pasta, and they're gonna stick with that. They like that combination. And if you take them to some completely out there restaurant where that's not on the menu at all, they're gonna go, okay, like, is anything on here have like hamburger in it? Like, I'm not interested in anything on this menu. That's not really my taste. I'm not really into that. Whereas for people that are switches, they might still like hamburger and macaroni and all that other stuff, but they also like a bunch of other things. They also enjoy like a good spicy curry and a nice creamy and sort of citrusy tom kha, and they like cool Hawaiian shave ice, and they like just a bunch of different things. And it doesn't mean they don't like macaroni and hamburger. They just happen to also be able to enjoy a more diverse set of things. And I want to say here, I'm not trying to say that like switches are superior because they have a more expanded palette. That's not what it is. It's everyone's allowed to like the things they like, and they don't have to like the things they don't like. I just want people to feel happy and be accepted. That's really always my goal. Now, the next question is, if you want to be a switch, how do you do that? How do you navigate that? It's actually pretty simple. I'm gonna give you guys a big secret right now. You negotiate. I know, I always say that in every video, I feel like, but negotiation is really how you navigate being a switch, especially if you are doing pickup play where you are around people that don't necessarily know you or have a preconception about what you're into. You need to say up front what role you are interested in doing, because a lot of people somehow can go through an entire negotiation and never say what it is that they're doing in terms of being the top or being the bottom. And that can lead to a lot of awkwardness when you both go into the scene both expecting to be the bottom and no one is ready to be the top. That happens quite often, actually. So just be upfront. Just say, hey, I'm really interested in topping tonight. Are you into that? Or, hey, I would love to bottom to that thing I saw you do the other time I was at this play party. Are you open to that? And just say what it is that you want. Being confident and being assertive are a good thing in a negotiation. And ideally, hopefully, if you are playing with responsible people, it will not scare them off that you are being authoritative about, hey, I want to do this thing. Of course, when you are a switch, especially when you are with other switches, it might not necessarily be that easy to figure out ahead of time in a negotiation what role you want to play. And for that scenario, we have something called switch fights. And oh, they're a hoot. So sometimes you really like just feeling out the energy, and you have to be in the moment, in the scene, to know what's going to happen. And switch fighting is basically what it sounds like. It is where you have some kind of struggle, usually with rough body play or pressure points, maybe some really quick bondage, and you just have a physical confrontation within negotiated guidelines to figure out who's going to be the one that has to submit, who's going to be the one that is in control, and having that really raw, primal experience can be super, super enjoyable for people. I know a lot of people that love having those kinds of scenes where there's that really deep, very real struggle, and then kind of being able to fully let go into like, oh, like I know this person is going to be totally in control of the scenario, and I get to fully let go knowing they are the authority, or they get to be the authority, and you get kind of that like sweet smell of victory because you got to fight for your position, and that energy exchange really, really helps set up the scene. And if you're someone that kind of likes the idea of struggling with bratting, but you don't really like the other aspects of bratting, maybe that kind of more rough, primal sort of a play, if you want to think about it like that, could be something that you enjoy. But I also want to acknowledge, even as fun as switching can be, it can also be a struggle to get a switch's needs met, especially when in a monogamous relationship where the other party isn't a switch themselves. It's a really classic scenario where you have someone that's in a relationship with a dom and they want to switch, but the dom does not ever want to be submissive or bottom. They have no interest in that. And that can be a lot of struggle. And it can also happen that there might be two bottom leaning switches in one relationship, and then it's a very tricky sort of navigation to figure out how much do we both get to bottom and feel like we're getting our fair share. And I think with some tweaking and a lot of experimentation and conversations and practice, there can be a way to potentially find an equilibrium here. So with the dom example, maybe the dom finds that they enjoy bottoming for flogging because it's not really a pain thing for them. It's more of a deep tissue massage, and it feels really good on their back on a Friday night after a long week of work, so long as they still are in control of how it happens and when it happens. And maybe for their switch partner, that kind of gets their switch needs met. And maybe the people that are both more bottom leaning figure out some kind of schedule where it's like every other week you get to be the bottom and I'm the top, and that feels good for us. I do also want to acknowledge that what is exactly counted as being monogamous is a little bit different in BDSM spaces than in the general population. I know a lot of people that are in monogamous BDSM relationships where they are sexually and romantically exclusive, but they do have play partners and they do play with other people, because it is entirely possible to have a non-sexual, non-romantic approach to BDSM. It can be like playing video games with your friends. You can play Mario Kart just with your partner you live with, but you can also play Mario Kart with your other friends, and that's not really seen as cheating. It's just sometimes you want to play this video game with one person and then with someone else, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't like love the other person or that you're cheating on them because you happen to play the same video game with a different person. Although I am sure there are people out there that would consider that to be a violation. Now, of course, having that kind of differential where you agree, hey, you know, as long as we're still exclusive in these ways, you can go out and do these things and have sporadic time with other people, doing other types of scenes. Navigating that is still tricky, and of course, if for you or for your partner, BDSM is exclusively a romantic and or sexual experience, that kind of thing isn't necessarily going to be possible, or it's going to be very, very difficult to navigate. And I think that's, of course, in the abstract, not really something that I can solve for you. This is just going to be something that you're going to have to consider should you find yourself in a scenario like this. Even if you're not in a monogamous relationship, there can still be issues, especially within the larger BDSM community, with switches. I think this has changed a lot, especially where I live, in the past decade or so. But there are a lot of people that have a lot of bias against switches. They think of switches as being like fake submissives, people who try to get away with topping from the bottom, people who just haven't picked a side yet, people that aren't really domly enough and secretly do actually always want to be submissive but are trying to cover it up and are lying when they say they like to dom or top sometimes. And again, I do think this has really changed a lot in the last several years, especially, but it is still a problem, especially in a lot of places that maybe are ran kind of by like one person that is really anti-switch and just spreads that everywhere where they run events. And it's obviously bullshit. Okay, can we just agree on that? It is completely ridiculous that switches, just by virtue of enjoying multiple roles or different things within BDSM, are somehow fake submissives because sometimes they top or they also are dominant to other people. This is not, you don't have to, there's no purity testing. It's not that you have to, if you're real submissive, you'd only ever submit to anyone. And I know a lot of people, especially female dominants, that struggle with negative stereotypes around this, and there are a lot of, let's be honest, male submissives that do not want to submit to a dominant woman that either is currently or at any point in time has ever submitted to a man. And can we just stop doing that, please? It's really bizarre and it's not helpful, and it's only, frankly, limiting your pool of options, which is already pretty small. So just the bias needs to end, and it's just not something that I enjoy on any level, and it doesn't make any sense to me, so I can't even really describe to you why this bias is there, but it's out there. And just know, if you are in a space where people are acting this way, that is not universal, and that idea is definitely changing. But even in spaces where switches are more outwardly accepted and there's not that same level of bias, there can still be issues. I think in general there is a tendency to stereotype people off of the first few scenes they do in a public setting or what they have on their FetLife photos, and people get really strong reputations pretty easily. Suddenly you get known as the rope top guy, or the service sub that's always at the high protocol parties, or the food play guy, or whatever else. And for someone that does have kind of more exclusive interests, those kinds of labels maybe don't really matter. But if you are actually a switch and people are assuming, based off of very limited presentation, everything that you are and everything you're into, that's going to cause a lot of struggle. And I think this is in particular a problem with more top-leaning people that have more rare and desirable skills, where you get sucked into this loop of always having your play card being full because everyone wants to go on the bondage ride. They all want to try needles. They all want to do the violet wand because it's cool and loud and zappy and has fun colors and is super noticeable in the dungeon. And for a while, you might be able to keep that up and go, oh, well, I like topping, this is super fun, and everyone's really into what I'm doing. And I've talked about this in another older video where I think I called it the top merry-go-round problem. It's very much this idea, but with the added side that as a switch, it means there's maybe an entire other aspect of your kink identity that isn't getting met at all. And especially if people are seeing you as a top, if you come out and say, oh, I want a bottom now, people are going to be like, I thought you were a top. I'm confused, even though you never had a conversation with them. And this leads to an issue of people almost like pre-negotiating in their own heads with someone and kind of just assuming they aren't available for things that they might actually be into. Again, really limiting people's choices and the fun things you might actually be able to do together. And this cycle of always being stuck on one side of the slash can lead to scene burnout. It can make people decide, just out of sheer frustration and lack of fulfillment, to leave the public scene altogether because they simply cannot shake off these stereotypes. And I think we do actually, as a community, have a lot of opportunities to help people not get into these cycles of stereotyping and making assumptions, which is some really easy things. I think some things that would really, really help would be if you are having a play party, have a sign up whiteboard. Just get a big old cheap whiteboard, put it somewhere towards the front of the dungeon, and go, top, bottom, switch, just columns, and then let people fill out what kinds of scenes they're looking for, and then get people name tags so they can put on their name tag, hey, my name's Evie, today I'm in the bottom column, and today I'm looking for a flogging scene. So that way people know who I am, they know what kind of scene I'm looking for, and that way from evening to evening, from play to play, you can go up and say, okay, well, I did the scene I wanted to do as a bottom, so erase that, okay, right in the top column, now I want a top for needle play, and I want to try that now. And that can just help people see, oh, okay, you're more into different things, and I see your name kind of on the top side some weeks, and on the bottom side some weeks, and it just helps people get an understanding of what kinds of things people are looking for, because you might assume based on someone's presentation or what play they're currently doing that they would never want to top for a needle play scene unless it was just really out there and easily available. I also think if you don't want to do something like that, super simple to just get some cheap buttons made. I love this both for pronoun stuff, for having your pronouns just super easy and right there. You can also do this for the role that you want to be in, and have someone that can have a button that says switch, or have, cheap dollar store name tags that leave enough room to be able to write on, hey, switch, top, bottom, dom, sub, whatever role that you want to put on there, you can put on there, because it's also a conversation starter, and it's really a lot harder to make just wrong assumptions when someone is self-labeling right there in front of you, where you're probably going to be looking at some point in the conversation. And that kind of allows more opportunity for things like, oh wow, hey Tom, I see you do flogging stuff all the time here. I didn't realize that you were also into doing wax play. I have a ton of really cool colored wax. Do you want to look at that and maybe do a scene together? And it's just that easy. And I think even if it's not for switches, stuff like this benefits everyone in the community, and the more opportunities you give people to communicate easily and navigate having scenes and pickup play, it's just going to be a more fun time. In my opinion, I have always had better experiences at dungeons where they have things like this ahead of time versus those that don't. So basically, don't make snap judgments. It's really hard to tell everything that a person might be into just because of one thing you saw on a Friday night, or a FetLife post, or heaven forbid a rumor you heard from someone else, because the only way you're ever going to really know how someone identifies is not by stereotype visually of looking at someone and going, they look like a dom, they look like a sub, but by having a conversation with that person and actually understanding them as they understand themselves. I know this is going to be so much longer than my original video about switches, and I hope it was worth it. I hope we got to cover some more ground today, and you all really enjoyed this. I would love it if you would subscribe so that way you don't miss out on any other videos from me, because I do make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM subjects. And by the way, for this video, if you guys have any additional comments, questions, perspectives as a switch, I would love to know everything you're thinking in a comment down below. And finally, if you did really enjoy this video, if you want to support what I do, you can go over to my Patreon. A link to that will be down below. I am doing a new thing over on Patreon where I am releasing all of my scripts and notes for videos to patrons. I'm kind of working out how to do it in terms of every week, bi-weekly, once a month. I don't really know, but you guys, if you want to see all my research and my whole script for these videos, that is going to be over on Patreon. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.